I want to talk to you about the fullness of time. You know, God always knows the exact moment when events should happen. It's kind of an interesting thing. Galatians says that in the fullness of time, Jesus came into this world. Now, there are two Greek words for time. One is chronos, which simply means time, like a second, a minute, an hour, a particular moment in time. But then there is this kairos. Kairos is the time that events happen at God's disposal, at the exact moment when it is the most perfect time in history for a particular event to occur. And so we see where the fullness of time was important for Jesus to come into this world. The year was 1809. And there were some pretty significant births that year. Of all years, William Gladstone was born in Liverpool. Alfred Tennyson was born in Lincolnshire. Oliver Wendell Holmes was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Edgar Allan Poe was born in Boston. Charles Darwin was born, and in Hardin County, Kentucky, in a little log cabin, a man by the name of Abraham Lincoln came into this world. All of those born in the same year. Now, I will be the first to admit that the birth of a baby is really only significant to immediate family or family members and close friends. But nobody in those areas probably knew what these babies would be when they grew up to maturity. They became very impactful on life. Now go back some 2,000 years. Here we are in a tiny little village called Bethlehem. You know, Jesus came into a stable scene. And in that stable, with animals and with his mother and father gathered there, there was very little pomp and circumstance. Obviously, he wasn't born in Hollywood. In Hollywood, there would have been a red carpet event. I mean, there would have been paparazzi, TV news channels, radio channels, headlines everywhere about the birth of the Son of God. But no, that's not the way Jesus decided to come into this world, and that's not the way God the Father wanted it to come anyway. You see, when Jesus came into this world, the Roman Empire was blazing on fire. They were capturing towns and villages all over their known world. Their empire was expanding. The emperors were building great statues to themselves and great buildings and aqueducts and roads and continuing to expand their military. They were doing things in a very flamboyant, very flagrant manner. And yet, there in that little town of Bethlehem, there was a small baby, the Son of God, born in obscurity. Interesting thing, even 5 miles across the way in the town of Jerusalem, religious leaders were doing their religious activities. People were scurrying about. Merchants were merchandising their particular items. And we see the Roman authorities were taxing as they were instructed to do. Activity. You know, today, God still chooses to come into our lives in a moment of quietness, sometimes solitude. But he comes only when invited in. We see where Jesus came, didn't come to palaces, didn't come to kings, queens, did not come to the rulers or to the military might, didn't come. Man, if I were God, I think I'd come with guns blazing. Boy, I'd want everybody to know this is my only begotten Son. But that's not the way God the Father chose it. And that's not the way he worked at that particular point. And to this day, he comes only when invited. Today, Jesus is depicted in Revelation 3:20 of standing at the door and knocking. And I love the British artist depiction of Jesus in the garden. It's a very famous picture. Growing up in in my Sunday school classes, there was always that picture of Jesus standing outside a door knocking. But the one thing that you notice, that I noticed as an adult, that I never noticed as a child, is that there is no handle on the outside of that door. It could only be opened from the inside. So even to this day, very quietly, very subtly, very indiscreetly, Jesus comes. And I pray that he has come into your heart in the midst of all of this Christmas chaos and confusion and activity and all the songs and all the things that tend to lead you away from Bethlehem. I pray that today you will trust in Jesus Christ, if you haven't already, as your personal Lord and Savior. He stands at the door of your heart and knocks. Galatians 4 verses 4 through 6 puts it this way. When the right time came, the fullness of time, God sent his Son, born of a woman, subject to the law. God sent him to buy freedom for us who were slaves to the law, so that he could adopt us as his very own children. God has sent the Spirit of his Son in our hearts, prompting us to call out, Abba, Father. Wow. You see, when you trust Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, you don't accept him as a baby. You accept him as Lord. And as Lord, he becomes Savior. And when he becomes Lord and Savior of your life, we cry out, Abba, Father. That Abba is an Aramaic term that really can't be interpreted into the English. It's like a small child saying Dada. It's that term of endearment. And we, as children of the Lord, rely on him as our Father. I pray today that in spite of everything, look to the quietness, the tranquility, the peace that passes all understanding by trusting in your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I pray that you have a very Merry Christmas. May peace be yours this day and forward. God bless.